Hello everyone, welcome back to Reading Corner. I'm so glad you could drop in today and listen to some new stories. I'll tell you what, since I've started Reading Corner, I've been reading from books that I have kept from when my kids were young. And I've run out. I have been reading so much, and so the really wonderful thing is now I've been able to borrow some books from the local library and also from some friends. So the books that I'm reading to you are new for me as well. So it's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to read some of those ones today. One of them is an old favorite called Mr. Brown Can Moo, Can You? The other two are new books. Belinda, which is all about a cow who doesn't want to be milked, and Mr. Tall, which is one that I didn't have in my collection before of Mr. Men books, probably because I'm not so tall. So we're going to start with that one, Mr. Tall. And I know that you're going to enjoy these books as much as me. Mr. Tall was very, very, very tall. Quite the tallest person you've ever met. In fact, quite the tallest person you've never met, because you've never met anyone with legs as long as Mr. Tall's legs, have you? Now, the problem with being as tall as Mr. Tall meant that life was just one long problem, as you can see. Oh dear, he used to sigh. Oh dear me. I do so wish that my legs weren't quite so very, very, very long. He decided to go for a walk to think over his problem. He was just stepping over a tree when he heard a voice, a little voice. Hello. It was Mr. Small standing underneath the daisy, but Mr. Tall was so tall he couldn't see him. So Mr. Small shouted at the top of his voice, hello! A Mr. Small shout is about as loud as a bee's sneeze. So it took quite some time for Mr. Tall to spot him. Oh, he said gloomily, it's you. You don't look very happy, said Mr. Small. What's up? I am, replied Mr. Tall, because of these silly long legs of mine. Oh, said Mr. Small. Mr. Small decided to cheer him up. Let's go for a walk together, he suggested. So they did, which, of course, didn't work. It was like a giraffe going for a walk with a mouse. Then Mr. Small had an idea, which did work. And because of the length of Mr. Tall's legs, they very quickly walked all the way to the seaside. Come for a swim, cried Mr. Small. Can't, replied Mr. Tall. By the time it gets deep enough for me to swim, I'll be out the other side. So Mr. Small went for a swim, while Mr. Tall sat down with a face that was nearly as long as his legs. Mr. Tickle came along. Hello, he said, you look as if you need cheering up. Care for a tickle? No, thanks, replied Mr. Tall. What I would care for are some different legs. Mine are much too long. So are my arms, said Mr. Tickle cheerfully, but all the better for tickling. And off he went, chuckling, looking for somebody to tickle, looking for anybody to tickle. Mr. Nosy came along. Cheer up, he said. You look very down in the mouth. What's the problem? It's my legs, replied Mr. Tall. They are too long. So's my nose, replied Mr. Nosy, laughing. But all the better for poking into other people's business. And off he went, looking for something to be nosy about, looking for anything to be nosy about. Mr. Greedy came along. Hello, he cried, you look gloomy. What's wrong? It's my legs, explained Mr. Tall. They're too big. So's my tummy, replied Mr. Greedy, but all the better for filling with food. And off he went, licking his lips. Mr. Tall sat there and thought about Mr. Tickle's arms and Mr. Nosy's nose and Mr. Greedy's tummy. He smiled And then he grinned and then he laughed out loud. He looked at his legs, those very, very, very long legs of his. All the better for walking, he chuckled, and walked home in 4 minutes, 40 miles. Mr. Small came out of the sea after his short swim. And how am I going to get home, he asked himself. And so he set off walking all the way home, 40 miles. That was last year. And he got home yesterday. Oh dear. Well, that was the long and the short of it, wasn't it? With Mr. Tall's very long legs. And he had to learn to be happy with just how he was made. Now we're going to read a book that I really know well because it's one of the ones that I used to read to my kids. It's called Mr. Brown Can Moo. Can you? And I think it's a lot of fun. Oh, the wonderful things Mr. Brown can do. He can go like a cow. He can go moo, moo. Mr. Brown can do it. How about you? He can go like a bee. Mr. Brown can buzz. How about you? Can you go buzz, buzz? He can go like a cork. Hop, 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 hop. He can go like horse feet. Hop, 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 hop. He can go eek, eek, like a squeaky shoe. He can go like a rooster. Cock-a-doodle-doo. He can go like an owl. Hoo, 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 hoo. Eek, 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 eek. Cock-a-doodle-doo. Hoo, 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 hoo. How about you? He can go like the rain. Dibble, 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 dop. Dibble, 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 dop, dop, dop. He can go like a train. Choo, 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 choo. Oh, the wonderful things Mr. Brown can do. Moo, moo, buzz, buzz. Pop, pop, pop. Eek, eek. Hoo, hoo. Clop, clop, clop. Dibble, 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 dop, dop, dop. Cock-a-doodle-doo. Mr. Brown can do it. How about you? Mr. Brown can whisper. Very soft, very high, like the soft, soft whisper of a butterfly. Maybe you can too. I think you ought to try. He can go like a horn, blur, 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 like a big cat drinking, slope, slope, slope. He can go like a clock. He can tick, he can tock. He can go like a hand on a door, knock, knock. Tick, tock, tick, tock, knock, knock, knock. Oh, the wonderful things Mr. Brown can do. Blur, blur, slurp, slurp, cock-a-doodle-doo, knock, 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 and hoo, hoo, hoo. He can even sizzle, sizzle. He can do that too, like an egg in a frying pan. How about you? Mr. Brown is smart as they come. He can do a hippopotamus chewing gum. Grum, 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 grum. Mr. Brown is so smart, he can even do this. He can even make a noise like a goldfish kiss. Boom, boom, boom. Mr. Brown is a wonder. Boom, boom, boom. Mr. Brown makes thunder. He makes lightning. Splat, splat, splat. And it's very, very hard to make a noise like that. Oh, the wonderful things Mr. Brown can do. Moo, moo, buzz, buzz, pop, pop, pop. Eek, eek, hoo, hoo, clop, clop, clop. Dibble, dibble, dop, dop, cock-a-doodle-doo. Grum, 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 choo, choo, choo. Boom, boom, splat, splat. Tick, tick, tock. Sizzle, sizzle, blurp, blurp. Knock, knock, knock. A slurp and a whisper and a fish kiss too. Mr. Brown can do it. How about you? The end. It's a bit of a fun book and you can have lots of fun making all the noises of things around you. I'm sure there's lots of other noises that you can make too, but the first one that Mr. Brown was moo, which is the sound that a cow makes. And we're going to read a story now called Belinda, which is all about a cow who didn't want to be milked. Let's see what happens. Bessie and old Tom live in the country. Early every morning, old Tom works in his garden. There's always plenty to do. He grows cucumbers and carrots. He grows pumpkins and parsley. He grows beetroot and beans and lots of other vegetables. Early every morning, Bessie milks Belinda the cow. There is always plenty of milk. She gives some to the dog. She gives some to the cat, and she puts some aside for old Tom and herself. With the cream, she makes the butter for their bread, and the skimmed milk she gives to the pig. One day, Bessie packed her bag, put on her hat and coat, and went to stay with her daughter, who lived in the city. She left old Tom to milk Belinda the cow, make the butter, and feed the dog, the cat, and the pig. Old Tom got up very, very early. He took the bucket and the stool and set out to find Belinda. Belinda was chewing in the far corner of the paddock. He sat on the stool and placed the bucket carefully between his knees. Gently, he put his hand on her teat. "There's a good girl," he crooned. Belinda gave one almighty kick. Old Tom flew high in the air and landed with a thud in the mud. Belinda was off, and old Tom was off after her. Around and around they went, mooing and trotting, around and around and around they went, until old Tom was quite out of breath. What was old Tom to do? There would be no milk for the dog, no milk for the cat, no milk for the pig, no milk for old Tom, and no butter for his bread. What was old Tom to do? He went to the shed and took a rope from the wall. Then he went to his garden and pulled up the biggest, fattest carrot he could find. And with these, he set out to catch Belinda. "Moo," crooned old Tom. "There's a pretty girl. Fat carrot, come to old Tom. There's a good girl." "Moo," answered Belinda as she cautiously, carefully inched towards the carrot. "Moo," bellowed Belinda as she snatched the carrot from old Tom's outstretched hand. "Ooh," cried old Tom as he landed with a thud in the mud. Belinda took off, and old Tom took off after her. Around and around they went, mooing and trotting, around and around and around they went, until old Tom was quite out of breath. Now, what was old Tom to do? If he couldn't catch Belinda, he couldn't milk Belinda. And if he couldn't milk Belinda, there would be no milk for the dog, no milk for the cat, no milk for the pig, no milk for old Tom, and no butter for his bread. What was old Tom to do? He thought and thought and thought and thought and thought. At last he stood up and strode into the house. He took Bessie's pink dress from the wardrobe and put it on. The dress was too big, so he took a pillow from the bed and pulled and pushed and stuffed and shoved until at last the pillow was with him inside the dress. Then he tied Bessie's apron firmly around his middle to hold everything in place. He put on Bessie's big straw hat. He pulled on Bessie's big rubber boots. In this disguise, he set out to milk Belinda. Belinda was chewing in the far corner of the paddock. She looked up and blinked and then went on chewing. Quietly, old Tom came closer and closer. He sat on a stool. He placed the bucket carefully between his knees. Gently, he put his hand on her teat, and this time old Tom didn't say a word. He squeezed. A warm white spray made a ping in the empty bucket. He tried it again. Squirt, 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 squirt. The milk crept up and up until the bucket was full and no more milk would come. Now there was plenty of milk. There was milk for the dog. There was milk for the cat. There was milk for old Tom and cream to make the butter for his bread. There was even plenty of skimmed milk left over for the pig. When Bessie came home, she wondered how her pink dress came to have mud on the hem. She almost said, "Who's been wearing my dress?" But old Tom had been the only one at home, and it couldn't have been old Tom, could it? The end. I hope you enjoyed these new books as much as I'm enjoying them. And I'm going to the library today to pick up even more to share with you all, which is going to be so much fun for all of us. But in the meantime, I hope you have a really, really good day. And I look forward to seeing you back here again next time at Reading Corner. Bye for now.